So, as we begin our starter here today, I'm going to go ahead and read through the problem. And again, please make sure that you've tried these questions first, and then you're coming back to this video to check your answers and just verify that they made sense. If you get stuck on any problems, obviously you can catch back up on those as and hopefully make sense of them as you go through the solutions here in this video. So, this starter problem is called community service. It says Diego's club earns money for charity when members of the club perform community service after school. For each student who does community service, the club earns $5. There are 12 students in the club. The total dollar amount earned, E, is a function of, I want to go ahead and pause right there and grab my highlighter because here's that phrase, is a function of the number of members who performed community service. They call that N. So the total dollar amount earned, that is going to be our output. Remember that the output is always a function of the input. And that means the number of members who are performing the community service. That's going to be our input. And I'm going to go ahead and underline that whole phrase because it's not just the number of members. We know there are 12 students in the club, but the number of members who perform the community service, that's going to be the input. So let's talk about a couple possible values as we're analyzing the domain and the range here. First question, is 5 a possible input value? Why or why not? So remember, input is the number of members who perform the community service. Well, there are 12 students in the club. Could 5 of the 12 students participate and perform community service? Absolutely. We could have 5 of the 12 perform community service. That would definitely make sense as a possible input value. We just couldn't go more than 12. We couldn't go below 0. Technically, none of them could participate, in which case, obviously, they're just not going to make any money. But we couldn't have more than 12. We can't have less than 0. And decimal numbers, fraction values, those wouldn't work either for input values. You can't have 1.5 students participate, right? They've got to come in whole number integer value increments. Now let's take a look at the second problem. Is 24 a possible output value? Well, if we think about this, each student who does community service earns $5. Let me go highlight this other phrase, right? Each student who does community service earns $5 for the club. And remember the total dollar amount earned? That's our output here. So we sort of have this rate happening here where each input gives me an extra $5. Well, if that's the case, can I go up by increments of $5 per student and end up with 24? Well, 4 times 5, if I had 4 students performing community service, that would be $20. 5 students would be 5 times 5 or $25. There's no way I can use $5 increments and get to 24. So we're going to say in this problem, no, 24 is not a possible output value. Why? Because the money earned, let me erase some of the numbers out of my way here. But the money earned must be a multiple of $5. So something like 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, all the way up to the maximum. If you had all 12 students participating, then you would do 12 times 5, and that would give you the maximum value. And we'll see that again here in just a moment. So 24, not a possible output value. It definitely makes sense as a money amount, but it's sort of an impossibility based on how the club is earning the money here in $5 increments. So let's go to number 3 now. Can we describe the domain of this function? We know we have 12 students in the club. We know that We can't have negative students participate. We can't have decimal or fraction values, but technically no one could participate or any sort of increase of one student at a time all the way up to 12. So what we want to do is we want to discuss this. I want to show you a couple ways that we could write it. We could list all the numbers of the domain, starting with the smallest, 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, and then I could keep going all the way up until I get to 11, 12. Right? This is one way you can list a domain. You could just tell what the values are for the inputs. Or I could write it in a sentence and say something like all whole numbers, or a good way to describe this is also all integers from the smallest number to the largest number possible. So this would be the domain of the function. All integers from 0 to 12. Integers are just like whole number values. They're not decimal values that have part of another number or fractional values that have part of another number. The only difference between integers and whole numbers is, technically speaking, whole numbers are always positive values and integers can be positive or negative. But because we said that we start at 0, we're already kind of eliminating the negative values from our answer choice here. But either way that we write this would be acceptable. And then number 4 tells me to describe the range of this function. Well, once again, I could just list these values out, make a slightly better little squiggle line here. This is one of these curly braces on your keyboard. This looks like the symbol beside the letter P key on your keyboard. And we put an open brace and a closed brace at the beginning and end if we're listing the values. So if nobody participates and performs community service, then the club doesn't earn any money. If one person participates, they earn $5. If 2 people participate, 2 times 5 makes $10, then 15, right? And this would keep going up in $5 increments. If we had 11 people, that would be 55, because 5 times 11 is 55. And then the maximum, if all 12 students participate, 5 times 12 makes 60. So I could list out my range this way. Or I could say, once again, all integers, but this time it's not every individual number. It's just the ones that are multiples of 5. So I could say all integers that are multiples of 5, or here's another way of saying it, all integers divisible by 5 from the smallest amount of money, $0, to the largest amount of money, $60. Okay, so now I have appropriately described the domain and the range. The number of students is the inputs, so that's my domain. And the dollars earned in $5 increments, those are going to be the appropriate values for our range. So hopefully these made sense to you. If you had any questions on your starter, hopefully this clarified any of those questions and helped you make sense of this. Okay, so now that you have this finished, if you will make sure your name is on it and turn it into the substitute, and then I want you to go back to Google Classroom and continue going through the agenda list, picking up with lesson 10 that we began working in class yesterday.